There, yes, take the lens cover off. That's good. All right, we're talking today with Wayne Skaggs of Eufaula, Oklahoma, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay, now Wayne, start us off with some background on yourself, and to begin with, where and when were you born?
I was born in about a mile and a half east of Stidham, Oklahoma, on a farm.
All right. In what year?
1949.
Okay, and did you grow up there or did you move around?
I spent my entire younger life until I was 19 years old, until I was drafted
Okay.
into the Army. I lived in that area.
Okay, so your family were farmers then?
Yes.
Okay, and what were you growing or raising on the farm?
You know, just a lot of corn, maize or milo, peanuts, soybeans, that type.
Okay. What part of Oklahoma was that in?
It's east central. It's about 70 miles south of Tulsa and a little bit east.
Okay. Had that been Dust Bowl country back in the 30s, or was it on the
You
fringe?
know, I'm not really, I think it was a little farther west in Oklahoma.
Yeah. All right. And did you finish high school?
Yes.
Okay. What year did you graduate?
1967.
Okay. And what did you do after high school?
Well, it wasn't too long after high school that I got drafted, but I worked on the farm, you know, different odd jobs, hauling hay and all those good type things. I'd spent some time for a couple of summers as a welder's helper. Spent one summer in Michigan and one in West Texas with pipeline.
Okay. So did you hook up with a company based in Oklahoma that sent you places, or how did you?
Well, I was a welder's helper, and so there was several guys in the area that followed the pipeline, and I hooked up with one of them as a helper and hired on with him with the pipeline company.
So you got to see a little bit of the country in the process.
Yeah.
All right.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, when did you get drafted?
In February of 1969.
Okay. Now, at that point, how much did you know about the Vietnam War?
Not a lot. I had heard some things, but I wasn't really, I was a teenager, and so I really didn't care that much about news on TV and what was going on. It didn't affect me. And
Right. Okay. Yeah, and you're not a place that would have been a hotbed of the anti-war movement or anything, so.
Not exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay, so you get the draft notice. Where do you go for basic training?
Fort Polk, Louisiana.
Okay. And what kind of reception do you get when you show up there?
Terrifying. Sergeants like to scream at you and get your attention. So yeah.
All right. And what did the training actually consist of? What did they have you doing?
Well, basic training is, you know, it's more the daily does, and the exercise, the running, and you know, the exercising and the drilling. The Army, they get you into shape, and then they teach you to drill, to march, and that type of thing.
Well, coming off a farm and doing outdoor work, were you in good shape when you went in?
Well, I thought I was until we started running, you know, those mile runs and things early in the morning, and I found they put me in shape pretty quick, though.
All right. And then how much emphasis was there on discipline?
A lot, yeah. A lot of push-ups, a lot of, you know, yes sirs,
And how easy or hard was it for you to adjust to living in the Army?
It wasn't really that difficult.
So were you used to taking orders or just minding?
Yeah, I think so. I think I was courteous growing up, and so it kind of goes hand in hand, you know, to taking the orders.
All right. About how long do you think the basic training lasted?
Basic training was, what, about 3 months, I believe, as I recall.
Yeah, but for a lot of cases, it was 8 weeks at that point in time, but it does
Okay.
seem to vary a little, somewhere in
Okay,
there, 2, 3 months.
That's been
Okay.
a long time ago.
Sure, sure. Okay. Now, normally you get advanced individual training of one kind or another. Did you do infantry training or something else?
Yes, from South Fort Polk, we went to North Fort Polk, which is, they call it Tigerland, which they have the infantry training there.
Okay. Now, how was that different from basic?
Oh, it was a lot different. It was a more of the guerrilla war type training, where the basic training is more physical, the getting you into shape, and AIT is more teaching you to, in combat type situations. And,
Now, to what extent was that geared toward Vietnam?
I'm sorry.
To what extent was that training geared toward Vietnam?
It was total, pointed in the Vietnam direction. The training that we got,
Now, did they have things like fake villages or people playing Vietnamese people or anything like that?
Not a lot.
Okay.
Not a lot of that type thing, but the training maps and compass reading and that type thing, and then you always had to go through. The last part of it was a thing where they put you at one spot and you have to go to find your way to point B in the dark with a compass and a map, and they have these drill sergeants kind of as enemy combatants that were their idea was to capture you and you were supposed to elude them and make it to the final point.
Okay. And so did you get caught?
No, I did not.
All right.
Did not.
Okay. Was that about another 8 weeks or whatever, do you think?
Yeah, 8, 9 weeks.
Okay. All right. And now what happens to you after that?
You get a leave, and then you go to Vietnam from there.
All right. Now, how do they get you to Vietnam?
Aircraft.
Okay. But I mean, you're home in Oklahoma or whatever first. And then so from there.
Yeah, I went to. Here we go.
Might have been Oakland or Seattle.
Oakland. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, Oakland, and then they shipped us out from there. Went to Alaska, to Japan, and then on to Da Nang.
Yeah. And were you flying on a chartered commercial flight, do you think? I mean, was it like a regular airplane? Or were you on a military aircraft?
It was a military aircraft.
Okay. So no stewardesses?
No stewardess, no.
Oh, okay. And now you land in Vietnam. What's your first impression of Vietnam when you get there?
My very first impression was hot, humidity, just terribly hot and humid. That was my very first, when they opened the doors, that heat kind of hit you, and it's like, wow, this is hot,
Okay. And now what do they do with you when you get off the plane?
They send you to an induction, or not an induction center, but a processing center, and we were there for, I think, maybe 2 or 3 days, and before they even assigned us to a division, we had a couple of 122s that exploded inside the camp area there.
Okay. So those are rockets?
Yes, yes. And it just happened to be in a mess hall full of guys with plates, and when those sirens went off, those plates went everywhere, and everybody hit the floor, and it was kind of messy.
Yeah. So welcome to Vietnam.
They introduced us to Vietnam
pretty quickly.
NVA style.
All right. And now, when was it that you arrived in Vietnam?
It was 11 July 69.
Okay. All right. And now, what unit do they assign you to?
The 101st Airborne.
Okay, so you know what division you're going to at that
Yes.
point. And then, where was the division operating at that time?
They first shipped us to Camp Evans, and they assigned us to companies, and they took me down to the company headquarters,
Okay,
and the company was out, and it was like one day, and the company came in, and
so you joined them
started
then?
with them there.
Okay. Now, for the record, which company was it that you were joining?
Delta Company,
Delta Company of,
2nd Battalion, 506 Infantry.
there we go. Always good to have that on the record.
Yeah.
Okay, so they come in, and then what kind of interaction do you have, or when you meet them, does anybody do anything to help you get oriented, or do they ignore you, or what?
For the most part, they tolerate you, I think is the word. You know, you're brand new, and but there's always some guys that want to help you.
Okay,
And,
all right. Now, how long was it before you went out into the field with
it
them?
was maybe 3 days,
Okay.
and
And do you remember anything about the first trip out into the field?
in a normal situation, we would, from Camp Evans, we would get on helicopters. That's what we did for all year long,
Right.
and go to some point that was predetermined. But my first time there, we went out at night and we walked out from Camp Evans, which was just unheard of, and we worked the flatlands around Evans for maybe a week or 10 days before they took us, load us on helicopters and CA'd us to another place.
And were there a lot of new guys there, or were you about the only one?
They were mostly old timers.
Okay.
I can't remember if I was the only one, but there were not a lot of new people there.
All right. Now, and then when you go out, then now do you go into the hills and the jungle after that, or?
When we went out the first time, we went, like I say, we went out at night, and then they took us out, or we marched out through the flatlands and found an area where there were some bamboo
Thickets?
and they set us up, about 3 men per group, and all around the bamboo thicket, and the first day there were 3 Vietnamese or Viet Cong, and the most of the time that I was over there, we dealt with the NVA regulars, but these were Viet Cong, and I had no idea what to do. Of course, here these guys walking around. We're in the thicket, and this is the whole area there around it was just really short grass, and so they're just walking right out through the open, and it's like, here's the guys, and there was a Spec 4 that I've forgotten his name. I've forgotten so many names, but he had been there for a long time, and he knew what to do. He hollered, "Chu Hoi, give up," and they didn't, and everybody just kind of shot, and well,
So it sounds like
they all three ended up down, and so this one kind of heavy set of the 3, the older one of the 3, was actually a paymaster for the Viet Cong, and I forget how many piastres it was, but it was quite a bit of money, and I remember we got a couple of cases of beer from it a little later when we went back to base camp, but There was this paymaster had run directly away from us, and somebody, I have no idea, I don't think it was me, but somebody shot and hit him in the back of the head. And the bullet did not penetrate the scalp, but it looked like it just there. His hair from that little knot on the back of your head there, the hair was gone in a space of about that wide that went right up his head, and his hat was laying there. He had a beanie hat on, and that M16 round had went up his head and just peeled all the hair off, went through the back of his hat, and picked that hat up, and that bullet was flattened out and hanging from a thread.
That's just
It's
bizarre.
one of those things that can't happen that did. It's just a crazy thing. But that was my second day in the field. You know, we went out one night, and that was the second day.
Now, when you're there in the lowlands, was that the only contact you had?
No, Sergeant Escobar, who was a platoon sergeant, he led a ambush that I was not a part of, but there was a bomb crater that, I don't know if it's probably 1,000-pound bomb crater that was out in this open, and it was just dished out, and they had set up an ambush there, and the far side of it had a trail, a clear trail, and there was 5 VC that came in that night, and they killed 4 of them, and 1 got away.
Okay.
But,
So, yeah.
No.
Oh, no, you're good. Actually, that's worked out. So basically, so you're really kind of out there just to try to sort of flush out whatever Viet Cong might be there. But so there's still some people around, but they're mostly not looking for a fight. You're just out there and clearing them out.
Well, yes, okay, yes.
I was trying to sort that out a little bit. Okay. But for you, actually, it sounds like that might have been a reasonable way of introducing you to being in the field, because you're not yet humping the mountains and in the jungle, but you learn something about being on patrol and what happens.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
All right. And now, having had that experience, now you go out, and now do you go in the hills, or where do you go next?
We stayed in the lowlands for a few more days, and we had another night movement, and I think everything crazy happened on the first week or 10
Okay.
days that I was there. The whole company went on whichever direction it was. I had no idea where we were, but we went through some tall grass and stuff, and being nighttime and no lights or anything, the point team broke from the rest of the company. Well, the leaders decided it would be best for the point team to come back and find the company instead of the other way around. Well, just down the line from me was our first sergeant, and he was an older, well, I'm 19, so everybody's older than me, but he was kind of he's a big German, and I don't know, I guess he'd been in the Army for a long time, but when the point team came back, and of course you could hear them, coming through the weeds, and the first sergeant challenged them, halt, who goes there, the old, I guess, World War II challenge. And nobody said anything, and so the first sergeant ended up wounding the point man. Another one of those crazy things. But that's one of those crazy things that happen,
Okay. So so the first patrol is pretty memorable on the whole.
It was. Yes,
Okay.
it was.
All right. And then do you go back to the base for a while before going out again?
No, we very seldom went back to base camp.
Okay.
You know, maybe once every month to 6 weeks, we would go back for a little stand down, you know, like 2 or 3 days.
So did helicopters pick you up from this patrol and take you someplace else?
Yes, they did. Like I say, it was a week or 10 days, and then they brought helicopters in, and we CA'd to a pre-cut LZ. They have them all over, you know, where they've, over the years, they've cut LZs, and I have no idea where we went.
Right.
But, most of the time, you know, until I became a squad leader, I didn't even have a map or anything, you know, so they took us up in the mountains.
Yeah, up in the mountains, okay. Now, what was that like? I mean, if you're patrolling in the mountains, you know, how do you operate? Do you have the whole company together? Do you split up?
Most of the time it was the full company, but you know, we'd be spread out over a large area. I mean, you had you know, 5-meter intervals, you know, 15 feet in between men as you went. You know, usually we'd get on a mountain top and work the ridge line for the most part. You know.
Okay. And what do you think you were supposed to be doing? What was the point of going along the ridge line?
Well, to find the enemy.
Okay.
That was what we were supposed to do, is find them and kill the enemy.
All right. And in the kind of these sort of latter months of '69, the first few months when you were out there, were you finding many enemy, or did they stay out of your way?
For the most part, we didn't see a lot of, you know, a lot of people. And once you got in the mountain, occasionally, and I mean very, very occasionally, you might run into a civilian mountain yard.
Mm-hmm.
But it was mostly North Vietnamese. The NVA regular soldiers is usually who you'd find if
Right.
you found anybody.
Now, did you find evidence of their presence even if you didn't see them?
Oh yeah, several. They would build those bunker complexes, and we've had times when that would be our job to just when they'd find a bunker complex, then we'd go in and take that CS gas, and if you explode that CS gas into the walls of the bunker, it kind of makes them uninhabitable. Mm-hmm. And there were times when that's what we would do, you know. So you'd find, you know, there were always trails and other signs of the enemy.
Now, when you moved through the jungle, would you go on trails or would you make your own?
For the most part, we would go on trails.
Did they
just
have?
watch for those booby traps and things. You know.
Were there many booby traps in that area?
You know, we really didn't find that many. We had not our platoon, but another platoon. There was one of the guys set off a 155 round that was booby trapped with a tripwire. And I warned you, I have trouble remembering what happened in, excuse me, which month. And
yeah. Well, for that kind of thing, it doesn't particularly matter.
Okay.
Because really, right now, what we're talking about is really, in the broader sense, you know, what is it like to be out on patrol in the jungle, and especially in your early months when you're just a rifleman or whatever before. Does your assignment change over time? You mentioned becoming a squad leader. And do you remember how long it took for that to happen?
Well, I was a PFC when I got to Vietnam, and I made sergeant, and it was like in February. I'd been in the Army a year when I made E5.
Okay.
And so that was in February of '70. Excuse me.
Okay. And did you have any other assignments? I mean, did you carry a radio or a grenade launcher, or were you just a rifleman and then a squad leader?
just went to squad leader, yeah.
Okay. All right. Now, in that period before you become a squad leader, did you stay in the hills most of the time, or did you
Almost all of our, almost the whole year was in the mountains of northern I-Corps.
Now, did the monsoon hit while you were in the
Oh,
mountains?
yeah. Oh, yes.
Yeah, what was that
Every
like?
day. My sister had found one of those little fill-ins at the end of the columns on newspapers. A lot of them have a little fill-in, and she'd cut out a little one and mailed it to me, and it said in February of 1970 that it had rained 60 inches in the northern I-Corps of Vietnam, which that's 2 inches a day. That's a lot of rain, you know.
Mm-hmm. Now, how could you get supplies and things if you're out in the hills and it's raining all the time?
Helicopters.
Okay, the helicopters could fly in the rain.
In monsoon it'll be, clear skies, and then it'll cloud up and it'll rain hard, very hard for 2 hours, and then it'll stop and then clear back up, and
All right.
so most of the day there's no rain, but for that 2 hour period when it's raining very hard.
Okay. And what are you doing while you're out in patrol all this time? What are you doing for food and clothing and anything else like that?
Well, we have helicopters resupply us with sea rations mostly, and you just when you resupply, well, you just put them in your rucksack and carry them with you.
Okay. Now, the sea rations had different things in different packages. Were they marked in some way so you knew if you got a box, you knew what that was? Or did
Oh,
you,
sure, yeah.
Okay. And what kind of food did you prefer if you got to pick?
Oh, pound cake, which came in a little, and peaches, which came in a little.
All right.
That was probably one of the favorites of all the sea rations, which are not really a great meal, but it's filling, and
Right.
it keeps you going. So.
And were there particular, like the meat stuff, were there particular things that you preferred or would not eat?
Well, of course you preferred certain ones, but I couldn't tell you what my favorite was, right
All right.
now.
So you're not for or against ham and limas?
No.
Okay.
No.
All right. Just thought I'd ask that. Okay. Now during this period when you're still private, or you become Spec 4 at some point before private, or?
Well, PFC and then you Spec 4 and then
Right.
which is,
Okay. Now, was the unit taking many casualties in late 69, early 70?
we took some casualties, but not what you would think would be a lot.
Right.
We, have little, the average firefight lasts about 5 or 10 seconds, and they would always hit and run, they never wanted to just go into a full battle type,
Right.
Just hit and run,
Okay. Now we get into early 1970, you become a squad leader. Now, do you start to have a better idea of what's happening and what your unit is doing then?
a little more, yeah, a little more. At least I knew more where we were than before.
Okay.
I don't know if the mission really changed a lot. It was always, find the enemy and neutralize them as best as you could.
Okay. And did any of your officers make much of an impression on you? This can be really any time in your tour.
I had a couple of second lieutenants that made an impression, and it wasn't really good. But
Okay.
I had a first lieutenant that named McCall,
Mm-hmm.
and we always called him Gator. He was from Louisiana, and it was always called him Gator.
Mm-hmm.
And he's a good guy, and he's a brave man too.
And then did you see much of Captain Rollison?
You know, we didn't have that much contact, just man to man with Captain Rollison. I mean, we were here and he was up here, you know. So, but he was a good man too. Had a lot of respect for Captain Rollison.
Okay. Now, as we get into farther in 1970, starting in March, the battalion as a whole starts to operate in the area where the fire base will get set up at Ripcord.
Yes.
And do you remember much about that in terms of when they're first going in? Because you would be patrolling around in the jungle in that area. And by then you're a squad leader, and so you've got maps and you kind of know where Ripcord is. What was going on in the field in those first few months when you're there, before July of 1970?
Well, for our platoon, it picked up. I mean, there was more contact, and we took more casualties. So there was as we found out later, there was a lot larger force than we were encountering in the lowlands. You
Right.
know, there were a lot of NVA in that area, and we were having more encounters with them.
Now, would the firefight still be pretty short?
For the most part, yes. They, for my platoon, I know some platoons got into much longer firefights, but they were still, as I recall, more hit and run type.
Right. Now, did you spend any time up on the fire base itself?
Personally, I was there. Delta Company was there, pulling security on the fire base. All through July and up until the 6th of July. And that's the day that Delta Company went to reinforce another platoon. I don't remember that
okay.
exactly.
Yeah.
But
were you,
personally, on the 6th, I was due to deroast, to leave the country on the 10th. And I asked Lieutenant McCall, company's leaving. Do you want me to go, or should I go back to? And he said, yeah, you better go back, And so I left on the 6th and went back to Camp Evans and cleared company and cleared battalion, and I left Vietnam on the 9th and came back home.
So on the 2nd of July, that was when things started to get ugly. That was when Hill 902 got attacked. Were you up on Ripcord when that was happening?
Yes.
Okay, and could you see or hear much of what was going on?
Are you talking about the sapper attack?
Yeah.
Yeah. It was basically right in front of us. Early morning.
Right.
And a lot of explosions. Just out of a still night. Just a lot of flashes, a lot of small arms. We didn't know what was going on, but we knew that there was definitely a firefight, battle going on there.
Okay. And I guess they were using illumination rounds after it started. And could that have an effect on what you would see on the hill, or was it just?
Well, we were still so far away. I mean, it was below
Mhm.
our eye level, you know.
Right.
Although it was in front of us, it still, you couldn't see any detail of what was
Right.
going on. It was just too far away.
Okay. Now, just on a more basic level, what kind of setup or whatever did you have when you were on the hill? I mean, were you in a bunker or?
We had just a foxhole, and it had uh, like an ammo box. It sat on the front of it, and then there were the devices that you use to blow the claymore mines that are set up below you on the hill, and then to the right it was dug out, and then there was PSP over the top of it, and then sandbags on top of that, and that was our sleeping quarters right there at the end of that foxhole.
Yeah. So you had a place to hide in a fighting position, kind of
Yes,
right together
exactly.
in the same spot.
We took a round on top of that bunker, a 61 millimeter mortar landed on top of that, and there was 3 of us in there, and Captain McCall woke us up. He thought we were all dead in there, and it was like, boom, what was that, and we all kind of went, oh, okay, and he come running in and go, you guys all right? And it's like, yeah, what's going on? He said, man, a round just went off on top of your bunker, and it's like, oh.
I guess you were lucky it was only 60 millimeters.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, while you were on the base, I mean, the last few days, I guess mortar rounds were coming in fairly regularly. Before that, could you kind of walk around on top, or did you just stay in your hole?
Well, we were on security, so we really didn't go to the top. I mean, that's where the artillery was
Right,
all set up,
right.
so we don't go into their area. We just stayed on our bunker line.
And was that kind of dug into the side of the hill to a certain extent? So there's a peak, and then you're below that.
Well, yeah, we're below the peak of the hill, down on the side, and then the bunkers or the foxholes are dug in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, when you were back in a base camp, what kind of facilities or conditions did you have there?
At Camp Evans, there was, a PX and, NCO
Club, yeah.
club. Not as nice as they are in the States, but they served beer, so they served the purpose, There were about, I guess, 3 times during the year that they would take the company and fly us over to Eagle Beach, which is it's a kind of a resort or an R&R center for the 101st Airborne, and you'd get to spend 2 or 3 days. I don't remember exactly how long it was, but it was a secure area. It's a little strip of land that's kind of in the ocean, and it's secure, and you could go and let off steam and swim in the ocean, or just take it easy for a while.
And not pull guard duty or
Not
anything
pull
else
guard
like that?
duty.
Okay. Now, did you get an R&R while you were in Vietnam?
Yes, I did.
And where'd you go?
I went to Sydney, Australia.
Okay. And what was that like?
It was the closest thing to being at home in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
There were, people that looked like us there. A lot. If you went on one of the other R&R locations, well, they were Oriental, there. So Hawaii was an option, but I wasn't married at that time,
Mhm.
and everybody just it was kind of unwritten rule that you didn't go to Hawaii. You let the married guys go
Mhm.
to Hawaii, and then they could meet their wives there.
Mhm.
So I chose Sydney, Australia, and had a good time.
Mhm. And was it hard to go back to Vietnam from there?
Not that. I mean,
Okay.
it's you knew you had to go, so uh, it wasn't something that you really wanted to do, but you knew you had to. So
Mhm. Okay. What kind of impression did you have of the Vietnamese people themselves, to the extent that you saw them?
you know, they were mostly they were good people.
Mhm.
I can remember one time when we were at Camp Evans, as you usually do, or most guys that go back for, stand down for 2 or 3 days. Well, I drank too much beer and then went out the gate, and right outside the gate, a short distance, a village named Phong Dien, and there were 3 or 4 of us just kind of wandered down the street there, and there was a family, and they invited me in, and I first thinking, well, are they gonna, knock me in the head, but they brought me in, set me down at their table, and they were having fish heads and rice, and I mean, they're just good people, and they appreciated what we were trying to do there, and I think a lot of them were that way. They were just, I guess everywhere there's just good people, and then there's bad people, but.
Yeah. Did you have a Vietnamese scout with you? Did you have a Kit Carson scout?
We did. We had a what they call a Kit Carson scout, and I'm sorry, I don't remember his name, but he was more with the company. But in my squad at one time we had a Chuhoy, and again his name. Somebody told me his name just the other day, and I forget
No,
it.
Chu Hoi was somebody who.
It's he was he was for their side, and he came over to our side and served as a scout for us. He had been wounded with a claymore mine, and he would wear shorts a lot, and he just had like dozens of holes of little scars in his legs where that claymore mine had went off and got him.
Was he any good as a scout?
He was.
So what could he spot or see that you didn't, or what could he do for you?
Well, that's just it. He had been a enemy combatant, and he knew what to look for. He knew what they would be doing, and he could tip you off to things, possible dangers.
Okay. And to think back to the year that you spent in Vietnam, are there other memories or whatever that kind of stand out, even if you're not sure when they happened?
Well, I know that there's one day. It was in the Ripcord area that there was a sergeant from, I think we were in, I was in second squad. That was second platoon.
Yeah.
Excuse me. I think he was in third platoon. I'm not positive, but he had been killed. He had been shot through the helmet and killed, and we had riffed just below that area, and we ended up being ambushed. I was a squad leader, and so I always walked slack, which is second. I always walked slack for my point man, and I never knew my point man's name. He was Red. It's just like Captain McCall was always Gator. Well, Red was, and that's all the name I ever needed, I guess. But he was wounded 3 times, and I can remember hitting the ground and feeling the bullets hitting in the ground around me, and when it stopped, Red said there was 3 of them, and so they have 30 rounds clips, so I'm guessing they shot 90 shots, and when I started to look up, I couldn't see anything for the dirt that had boiled up around me. But the man behind me, his name was Downing, and he was just grazed in the head right there. Not a horrible wound of any, or it didn't. It just kind of grazed him. And then behind him was probably my best friend of the whole year. His name was Shelton, and he was from Kentucky, and he'd been hit in the front of the leg here, and it blown out his whole calf was just gone, they're just here today. There's at this reunion. There's a lot of people from Delta Company, but there's nobody from my squad, and I'd like to think if those guys hadn't been wounded, fortunately they weren't killed. That's the good news, and I just kind of think that may be why they're not here today, is because it kind of took out half of my squad, Okay.
Now, what did you do after that ambush was sprung? So the enemy fired their magazines and left, as far as you know?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we just, swept the area with and there was actually a Spec 4 that brought a machine gun up, M60 up, and I was hollering back, we were talking back and forth, and he fired down the trail, and then we got Red out, and then, we all got out, and there wasn't any more contact then.
Okay. All right. Now, tour ends in Vietnam. Do you know where you flew out of to go home? Did you go to Cameron or somewhere else?
Benoit.
Benoit, okay. Yeah. And where did you land in the States?
In Washington.
Okay. And what kind of reception do they have for you when you're coming back from Vietnam? What do they do on the other end?
I'm going to be honest with you. I have no recollection.
Okay.
I mean, other than, coming into Fort
Lewis.
Fort Lewis. Yeah. I just know that I come in there and, got rid of my old clothes, and they gave me new clothes, and paid me and sent me on my way.
Okay. Now, was this the end of your time in the service, or did you just have a leave and then you had to go somewhere else?
Yeah, I had to leave, and then I had 6 months left, and I spent that at Fort Carson, Colorado.
Okay. Now, when you first got back to the States, did you get a leave to go home first and then go to Fort Carson?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did you encounter any anti-war protesters or anything like that?
I really did not. I don't know, Oklahoma.
Well, actually, I meant kind
home.
of in the airports sort of thing, whether it's Seattle or any place like that.
No, actually, people were nice,
And did you go home in uniform?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, because sometimes people had trouble, sometimes they didn't. So I always ask. Yeah.
I've heard
Okay. I go back home and back home, see people in Oklahoma, and then off to Fort Carson. What did you do at Fort Carson?
Nothing. Well, I mean, you know, we really didn't. There was a whole bunch of Spec 4s and E5s that had been to Vietnam, and they were just doing their last 6 months, just drilling and.
Now, would they try to keep you busy all day, or just a couple hours a day?
Yeah, just a few hours a day. Yeah. Funny, which I thought was funny. We had a second lieutenant that was fresh out of OCS, and we had a whole barracks full of vets. You know, all Vietnam vets. You know, and he would come in, boy, just full of himself, you know, every morning, and then I go, "Morning, sir." I saluted him left-handed for like 3 weeks before he caught on that it was. But he was pretty cool guy, you know.
Okay.
But he was ready to go in the war, you know.
All right. So basically, you're just killing time.
Yes.
Okay. And then, what do you do once you're finally out?
Go home.
Okay. Do you just go back on the farm, or find a job, or?
Well, I found a job, and met my future wife, and got married. And,
So what kind of work did you do?
I spent about 45 years as installing carpet, ceramic tile, wood floors, just floor covering.
Yeah. Okay. So it's a skilled job, and we need people who can do that. So, okay, and so that worked for you. You enjoyed doing that.
It was all right, you know. Yeah, I don't know if I ever enjoyed work. I just putting in my time until I retired, I think.
Okay. I guess to look back at your time in the Army, how do you think that affected you, or what did you take out of it?
Gosh, that's a tough question there, right? There was a lot of guys that, you know, friends and guys that I had a lot of respect for, you know.
I guess you mentioned, you know, when you were drafted, there was something about the splinters under your
Yeah,
fingernails.
splinters under my
you
fingernails,
didn't
where they
want-
drug me off the porch. Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, I guess you know, if you had to do it over again, would you do it, or?
Of course I would.
Okay.
You know, not brave by any means, and I didn't like my time over there, but you know, given the choice, I wouldn't go to Canada to burn my draft. I mean, I'm at least that much of a patriot.
Sure. Your country calls and you go.
Yes.
Okay. Well, you were concerned that you wouldn't be able to tell the story well, but in fact, you did a very good job. So I'd just like to thank you for taking the time to talk to me today.
You're welcome.